you ready to permanently fuse leadership and philosophy? Then a word of caution. You are about to enter the fully abstract yet wholly concrete realm of Leadosophy. Our ideas are not always so clear and distinct. To validate this proposition, we welcome the host of Leadosophy, Tim Woody.
Friends, welcome to the realm of Leadosophy, where an open mind is the rule and not the exception. I am your humble host, Tim Woody. I am fresh off my first episode of Leadosophy. If you didn't watch it, I had a great interview with Darren Gertis, a professor of leadership and management, and it was a great interview. Reflecting on that first episode, I should have introduced Darren a little more robustly. That was some critique I had from my wife, who is one of my biggest fans, and she is not afraid to give me some solid feedback if I need it, which is what this show is about. Leadosophy is inherently about, examining our practices, mainly leadership practices, trying to understand what we can do better, how we can learn more. We're always students of leadership. We're students of knowledge. We never know everything. So it's great to get feedback from my wife. She was spot on with some of that first episode feedback. Another thing I wish I would have done a little better in that first episode was explain Leadosophy as a concept. So Darren kind of challenged me on, where am I going with Leadosophy and what is my point of the show, my podcast? So I have the podcast and I also have the YouTube channel. Great question. Kind of caught me off guard a little bit, which is good because that kind of immediately forces you outside of your comfort zone and kind of very quickly makes you try to collect your thoughts and try to package it neatly into something that other people can, understand. And when I say understand, like understand your gibberish. If I thought a little bit when I was talking about Leadosophy that I was just kind of talking gibberish. So most people would be like, what is this dude talking about? Like Leadosophy? This is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Fusing leadership and philosophy? I mean, come on. Just a quick word of little fun fact. Leadosophy is officially, it's called a portmanteau. A portmanteau is just the fusing of two words, like motor and motel. Leadosophy is a portmanteau. And you may have known that it was obviously leadership and philosophy fused, but the actual definition of that is portmanteau. You can look it up in the dictionary. It's actually a word. We got a concept or a word for everything. So anyways, Leadosophy is born. I started this concept or came up with this concept a couple years ago, right before I started my graduate work at Gonzaga. I thought, why isn't leadership and philosophy, why is it not one concept? But if you go back even 2 years before that, in 2016, when I started my studies at Florida Atlantic University, my philosophy studies, which I mind you was after a 20-year military career. So I retired in 2015 from the Coast Guard as a chief warrant officer. So I've been out of the military for almost 6 years now. I've been back into the civilian workforce for about 18 months or so, which is really interesting comparing that juxtaposed against military, the work world of the military. But anyways, I went back to school at 38 years old at Florida Atlantic University in beautiful Boca Raton, Florida. Palm trees. As I look outside my window here in the Pacific Northwest and the wind's blowing 30 knots and it's driving rain, I think about Boca Raton and the palm trees. It's probably about 85 degrees right now and sunny, so I imagine. Anyways, my first philosophy class was philosophy of mind, which is a very dense philosophy subject. It's a subfield of philosophy. First class, I remember thinking, why isn't leadership a subfield of philosophy officially, like in a curriculum? And I can never get that thought out of my head for my 2 years studying philosophy. So, I can remember reading philosophy texts, Western philosophy, even some Eastern philosophy, new philosophy, ancient philosophy. There's so many times reading texts or scholarly articles or, just regular news articles. There's so many times where I'd read something that was philosophy or supposedly philosophy, and it would spark something about leadership. So I've always had this burning passion to talk about leadership. And I started this YouTube channel and the podcast to just do that publicly. And another reason is I thought, there are no leadership podcasts out there. I'm going to be the first one. Definitely no YouTube channels on leadership. So I'm going to break ground. I'm going to be the first one. I'm going to trailblaze. Obviously, I'm being sarcastic. Just as there are tons of leadership books, thousands of leadership books. I don't know what I hope to add with Leadosophy or this show. I can't say that publicly I'm trying to add really anything, and I guess that comes from a position of humility. I have a lot of experience in leadership positions. I think I have some knowledge. I think there is some value added that I bring to the table in the world of leadership, being a good follower, looking at leadership through the lens of philosophy a little more than maybe you normally do. So again, why not just do it publicly? And maybe there is something I can add. And you know what? If my two sons, my it sounds like a show. I think that was a show. My two sons. I literally have two sons. Not literally. I do have two sons. That sounds like a tautology. My two sons are 19 and 14. And if they watch this and get a little nugget of inspiration, man, this is a win for me. I know my wife will watch occasionally, so that's cool. So maybe I have 3 people that watch this show on the regular, which is cool. But honestly, I enjoy doing this. I enjoy talking publicly about Leadosophy, leadership, and philosophy. So that's a little bit about me, kind of where I come from. I draw your attention to the screen if you're listening or if you're watching. If you're not watching, if you're listening to the podcast, I have a quote on Leadosophy on the website. It's from Seneca. Seneca was a Stoic philosopher. He writes in Letters from a Stoic, Volume 1. This is a quote. "Philosophy is no trick to catch the public. It is not devised for show. It is a matter not of words, but of facts. It is not pursued in order that the day may yield some amusement before it is spent, or that our leisure may be relieved of a tedium that irks us. It molds and constructs the soul. It orders our life, guides our conduct, shows us what we should do and what we should leave undone. It sits at the helm and directs our course as we waver amid uncertainties. Without it, philosophy, no one can live fearlessly or in peace of mind. Countless things that happen every hour call for advice, and such advice is to be sought in philosophy." Unquote. That is from Seneca, Letters from a Stoic, Volume 1. So that, to me, that excerpt there, those words, that sums up why I try to look at leadership through a philosophical lens. I think it courses through every part of leadership, especially in reflection. So Leadosophy is about practice, reflection, and theory. And I think reflecting on our own leadership practices, I would say self-reflect, and then reflecting on the world around us and how we affect others, how our leadership, affects others, our behaviors, our actions. I think reflection is kind of driven right in the middle between our current practices, how we practice leadership, and then the theory side of leadership. And is there a coherence between those two, practice and theory? And as I dove into my studies at Gonzaga, and I dove into scholarly work on leadership, organizational leadership, and at graduate level, I realized that there's a lot of theory about, I actually didn't realize before I started at Gonzaga how much leadership theory is out there. So going through 2 years of that program exposed me to a lot of things some things I took for granted, which, hey, guess what? If you treat people like crap, they're probably not going to want to follow you. So theories that are written scholarly that just kind of regurgitate that, to other very deeper theories about emotional intelligence, concepts like appreciative inquiry, meaningful conversations, the art of dialogue, some of those deeper, more dense concepts and how those apply to our everyday practice of leadership. So again, Leadosophy kind of comes down to practice, reflection, and theory for me. And honestly, I think everything comes down to practice, reflection, and theory. I mean, whether you're an electrician or you are a leadership scholar or you are a train conductor, you are always practicing in your field. You might be reflecting on your decisions or lack of decisions at night when you're at home. And there's obviously, look at electricity, there's a lot of theory about electricity which guides why electricians do what they do. So practice, reflection, and theory, to me, it makes sense. And you may agree, you may disagree. But yeah, so, if you check out the website, Leadosophy, that's kind of, I talk about the genesis of Leadosophy, which was kind of in a nutshell what I just talked about. But you can basically, if I could sum up my leadership philosophy in four quick statements or 8 words, and you can see it up there if you're watching: lead humbly, learn together, empower others, flourish collectively. So that's me. That's kind of, if you're going to sum my leadership philosophy in 8 words, those are it. Those are those 8 words. So if I could qualify those 8 statements a little bit, or those 4 statements, 8 words: lead humbly. I try to ground myself in humility. Like I said, we're all fallible. To err is human, James Reason wrote. Learn together. The other kind of concept of Leadosophy, I believe that we co-create the truth, we co-create reality, and we co-create knowledge. And by that, I don't mean that everything is just this subjective world of anything goes, everyone's ideas are right. I'm not necessarily advocating for that, but I do believe there's a certain amount of truth, especially in the world where things are not always what they seem. And sometimes things cannot be quite so black and white. It takes this back and forth, kind of a dialogic back and forth between your thoughts and ideas, between my thoughts and ideas, for us to kind of synthesize, the truth into, what? You have this idea of what's true. I have this idea of what's true. Can we both be right? Could we both be wrong? Is there something in the middle? So that's kind of where kind of pushes the ball forward on learning, learning from one another and kind of co-creating this truth and even co-creating knowledge. I learned something from you. You learned something from me. Man, we've actually both gotten a little more smarter on whatever subject we're dealing with in. In this case, we hope to talk a lot about leadership and followership and learning from one another. Empower others. Man, power flows, or should flow, ought to flow, in my opinion, ought to flow in all directions from the perspective of leadership. There is a time, I think, where you can use power and authority effectively, especially if there is a decision that has to be made as a manager, as a leader. There are times where you have to just, we have to make a decision. I got to do this. I got to make this decision. It falls on me. But 9 times out of 10, I argue that the more you push power down to lower levels, to outside levels on the periphery, the more you will get out of people when they have that ability to make decisions, to influence others, to inspire others. So that's where that comes from, empower others. And then the last one, flourish collectively. Man, I think it does no good for me to flourish as an individual if I cannot make others around me better, and if others around me can't make me better. You know, I saw that with just my first podcast or my first episode, you know, looking at Darren, who I did the interview with, you know, he made me flourish in a very short time by getting my first podcast out. And hopefully maybe I helped him. I mean, he promoted my podcast once it went live. And, you know, hopefully maybe I encouraged him to, you know, do something, or, you know, I did. I encouraged him to give me some shout outs. So that was really awesome. But no, I learned a lot from Darren in a short period of time. So collectively, you know, I think maybe we flourished together. You know, I think Darren probably got something, knowing Darren, talking to him for the 45 minutes I did, I'm sure he was pretty jazzed up to be able to inspire me a little bit. It's kind of this reinforcing thing that happens, which is, it's fun. It's fun as a leader, and anyone that's in a leadership position, you know, if you inspire others and see them achieve something that maybe you helped push along or encourage or even just nudged just a little bit, that's really fun. That's like one of the funnest things about being a leader, in my opinion, is what you can help others do, you know, which maybe doesn't all really affect you in the short term, but it does. I think it builds your confidence as a leader. And when you see, when you inspire others to do something, I think that does inspire you as well. Again, I think this is a reinforcing concept. So those are my 8 watchwords of my philosophy in a nutshell. If you go to organizational leadership under the tab there's just a couple more things I want to talk about and round this discussion out on this first kind of introduction to what Leadosophy is. Because this first introduction, again, is important because it tells you a little bit of who I am and what I'm about and where I came from, my leadership styles, which some were effective. You know, I learned a lot. There were many times where I was not effective. So I think everyone has a leadership philosophy. Maybe not everyone has actually taken the time to write it down on paper. But you should. This is my argument that everyone should take the time to write your leadership philosophy down on paper, even if it's a few sentences. Sorry, I need a sip of coffee there. It's early morning on election day, and I'm just anticipating the madness of today. So I'm trying to get all jacked up on some caffeine. No, not really. I'm not. I do love to drink coffee, though. I'm a huge coffee drinker. Anyways, back to leadership philosophy. So I'm making the argument here that everybody needs to write down a leadership philosophy. Why? Why do I say that? Because as we come up in the world through the following, as we follow others early in our maybe work careers within the community, you know, early in our teens, you know, into our early adult life, we are observing the behaviors of others around us. As we observe the world around us, we start making assumptions about relational influences or just relationships in general, how person A is influencing person B. That is leadership. Remember, absent of 2 people, there is no leadership. With 1 person as an individual, there is no leadership. So as you observe relationships around you, how people are influencing one another, you start picking up ideas about what influences work, what behaviors don't work, what influences people to achieve more, what inspires others to work together, to collaborate, to communicate effectively, you start developing concepts of leadership. Now, some of these concepts that you develop, may turn out to be not so effective in certain situations. Could be. But again, as you develop as an adult and as you move higher up into the world of maybe a leadership role, again, whether it's at work or in your community, you lead people based on certain assumptions you have about human behavior, about what traits and characteristics get the most out of people, what traits and characteristics inspire people, what repels people away from you, what actions encourage people not to want to follow you. I mean, leadership is, I guess at its heart, is fairly simple when you think about it. Treat people nice, treat people with respect, have empathy. These are very basic human concepts, relational concepts that, hey, if you apply these in the workplace or in your community, chances are people will want to be around you. And if you don't, there's a good chance people don't want to be around you. So, by saying that, I might say, well, why you got to put that in a leadership philosophy? Because I think if you start writing down your leadership philosophy on paper, I think you might be able to reflect on what you've written and what you are about to write and say, hey, you know what? Why do I think this? And when you start thinking about why you are writing something, you start to examine or reflect or introspect into the deepest parts of your psyche or subconscious. You started really tapping into the why behind why you lead. And when you start tapping into the why behind why you lead like X or why you lead like Y, you can start unearthing maybe some inconsistencies, or you can deepen your understanding of why you lead like you do. And another point about penning your own leadership philosophy, it kind of makes you look inward at yourself, where I think if you go day to day in the workplace, it's very easy to get caught up in what others are doing or what others are not doing. And you start looking for, well, this result is not happening, so it must be person X or person Y that's not doing something. Instead of you're a default position going to, okay, what am I doing that is preventing results X or Y from not happening? So pen a leadership philosophy. I think it's really important. That's one of the great things I think we kind of went through in Gonzaga's graduate program is you pen a leadership philosophy at the beginning of the program, and then you end up revising at the end of the curriculum after 2 years. And man, just in those 2 years from 2018 to 2020, if I examine my leadership philosophy in 2018 and I examine my leadership philosophy in 2020, maybe not so much a lot of the core concepts changed, but there was a lot of things that I got rid of and a lot of things that I added to my leadership philosophy. And remember, this is after 20 years of being in the military. In those 2 years, in the last 2 years of not even being in the military, just being a graduate student and working part-time, my leadership philosophy evolved in 2 years. So that comes to one of the final things I want to talk about as it applies to Leadosophy in general. And that is this idea that we are always evolving. We are always learning. We are changing as individuals. I think it was Heraclitus that said, you never step into the same river twice. And I believe how that applies to leadership is every experience you have as a leader, as a follower, changes you. It's constantly changing you. If it's not changing you, then you are waving the white flag and you are admitting that leadership is just a static thing. It never changes. And I don't think anyone that is in a leadership position, I don't think anyone believes that. I think everyone understands that we're constantly evolving as human beings. We are We are picking up new knowledge. We are getting rid of something that's not working. And then just as a human being, we are evolving. Relationships change us. Events change us. So that's really important. That's a key principle of my idea of Leadosophy. And philosophically speaking, I think if we are consistently examining our belief system, especially as it applies to leadership, and from a philosophical standpoint too, if we are consistently examining our belief system, then we understand that change is always happening. We are always evolving into something else, hopefully something better, more refined. And when I say refined, I don't mean like, in our manners or anything. I mean just refining our thoughts on how we lead, how we look to influence others, how we look to inspire our teammates, how we look to make a bigger impact, a more positive impact in our community. That's what I mean by refining ourselves, our thoughts. So that's what I mean by dynamically evolving, and that is Leadosophy. So this is pretty much episode 2. I hope you have some ideas for me, maybe on future shows you want to see. I'm going to keep furthering this idea of Leadosophy. I like to think of, I'm going to borrow from Aristotle here. He writes in on the book on ethics. He writes about, when he talks about human happiness, he talks about it being a framework. And his writings are just a framework to be sketched in or filled in by others. And that's kind of how I view Leadosophy. It's a framework for me. I look to others to kind of, take the idea of Leadosophy and apply it to themselves in their own lives. Leadosophy is not something that I, objectively hold to myself and say only I can fuse the idea of leadership of philosophy. Man, anyone can do that. So you have the framework. I kind of started sketching out the framework of what Leadosophy is. Maybe it inspires you a little bit. Maybe it doesn't. I don't know. But there's going to be more episodes on kind of, as I build this framework out of Leadosophy. I'm still learning what Leadosophy is to me. And I'm still learning as a leader, as a student of leadership. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. Check out Leadosophy.com if you want to read more about some leadership philosophy. I encourage you to kind of maybe check out my leadership philosophy and challenge me. Challenge some of my core assumptions that are in that leadership philosophy. And then I encourage you to start putting down a few sentences on paper that reflect your leadership philosophy. That's my challenge to you. Here's the question. Why do I lead like I do? Right? That's a very heavy question. Why do I lead in the manner that I do? Why do I make certain decisions like I do? So take those 2 questions about, decision making and just leading in general. And man, write a paragraph about your leadership philosophy. And then, drop me a line. My email address is tim, T-I-M, @leadosophy.com. Drop me an email. Let me know what, actually maybe send me a few sentences on your leadership philosophy. I'd love to read it. And, if you want to, if you're okay, maybe I'll read a little bit about your leadership philosophy on my next podcast, on my next YouTube show. So that's it for Leadosophy. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for joining Tim Woody, Leadosophy.com, and the show Leadosophy. Catch me next time. Remember, Leadosophy is where we use philosophical thought to deepen our understanding of leadership. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching and listening to another episode of Leadosophy. If you liked what you heard today, hit that subscribe button and check out Leadosophy.com and learn more about Tim's ideas on philosophy and leadership. We'll see you next time.